Mara had been awake before the sun came up on the morning they left. She had heard the sounds of packing for 3 days. The scrape of crates across wooden floors, the low voices of people deciding what mattered and what could be left behind. She had not been invited to any of those conversations, but she had listened from the doorway of the small shed where she slept, and she had understood what was happening long before anyone said it to her face. Elder Rowan was the one who told her. He came to her just after breakfast on the last morning, holding his hat with both hands, the way people do when they feel guilty about something, but not guilty enough to change it. He said the land was too dry, the provisions too thin, and the group needed to move north, where there was a river and better soil. He said she had always been good with difficult conditions. He said they would send word when they were settled. He did not say they were sorry. He did not say they would come back for her. Mara stood very still while he talked. She had learned over many years of living among people who underestimated her that stillness made them uncomfortable in a way that words never could. Rowan finished speaking, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and finally put his hat back on his head, which meant he was done. "All right," she said. That was all she said. They gave her 3 days of food, a canteen that was not quite full, and the iron key to an old structure at the edge of the valley, a building from the mining days that no one had used in years. She stood at the northern gate and watched 23 people walk away from her. She watched until the dust from their wagon wheels settled back onto the gray valley floor and there was nothing left to see. Then she turned and walked into Ashen Hollow. The building was in worse condition than she had expected, and she had not expected much. The roof leaked in 2 places. One wall had a crack running from the window frame all the way to the foundation. The floorboards in the eastern corner were soft and dark with moisture damage. Mara set her bag down, walked the perimeter of the single room twice, and made a list in her head. She spent the first afternoon collecting materials. Flat stones from the creek bed for the foundation, dried grass and mud packed into the roof crack, and a section of pine bark stripped and wedged under the leaking joint. She worked until it was too dark to see, then lay down on the floor with her coat folded under her head and slept without dreaming. The second day she was all right. The third day she was not. She was sitting outside on the stone step, eating the last of the bread they had given her, when the silence of the valley pressed in on her all at once. It was not simply quiet. It was the specific quiet of a place that used to hold people and now held only her, a quiet with a shape to it like an empty cup. She set the bread down on her knee and stared at the ridgeline, feeling something loosen in her chest that she had been holding tight for 3 days. She cried for a long time. She did not try to stop herself. When she was finished, her face felt tight from the dried salt in the wind, and she was very tired, yet oddly a little lighter. A fox walked across the far edge of the clearing without paying her any attention. It stopped once, glanced in her direction with mild curiosity, and moved on. "Fair enough," Mara said aloud. It was the first time she had spoken since Rowan walked away. Survival does not wait for a person to be ready. The food ran out on the 4th day, and after that, necessity became her compass. She knew which plants were edible because her mother had taught her before she died, and her mother had known because her own mother had taught her. It was the kind of knowledge that communities stop valuing once they have enough stored food and a roof that doesn't leak. Mara had always known she carried something useful inside her. She had simply never expected to need it this urgently. She found chamomile near the base of the ridge and a tough, bitter green she knew could be boiled into something nutritious, if not exactly pleasant. She found a nest of late-season berries on a south-facing slope where the sun had been kind. And on the 6th day, walking the eastern edge of the valley, she found the water. It was not a river. It was a shallow marsh no wider than a long jump, fed by groundwater that had been quietly redirected by the old mining channels. The water was clear and cold, and the ground around it was dark, soft, and alive in a way the rest of the hollow was not. Mara crouched at its edge for several minutes, studying it. She boiled her first cup over a fire that took her 40 minutes to start because the flint she had was old and the kindling was damp. She burned her fingers twice. When the water was finally cool enough to drink, she sat with the cup in both hands and felt something settle in her. Not hope exactly, but its quieter, sturdier cousin. She had what she needed to stay alive. The rest was a matter of working out the details. She met Dove in her 3rd week. She had been following the water channel east to see where it came from when she heard him before she saw him. A low, tuneless humming drifted from somewhere above the shale ridge. She stopped walking and waited. A moment later, a man appeared at the top of the ridge and began picking his way carefully down the loose rock face toward the valley floor. He was old. His beard was white and tangled, and he wore a coat that had been repaired so many times, using so many different materials, that it looked like a map of somewhere complicated. He reached the bottom of the ridge, saw Mara standing there, and stopped. They regarded each other for a moment. "You're from the settlement," he said. It was not a question. "They left," she said. "I know. I watched them go." He tilted his head toward the ridge above him. "Good view from up there. And you didn't think to mention you were living up there?" He shrugged. "Nobody asked." His name was Dove, and he had been a miner in the Hollow 40 years earlier, when there was still something worth mining. When the company pulled out, most of the workers went with them. Dove had stayed. He said the North had never agreed with him and that the Hollow was as good a place as any, which was, Mara thought, either wisdom or stubbornness, and possibly both. He was not warm exactly, but he was honest and he did not waste words. Mara had spent enough of her life around people who spoke constantly and meant very little that she found this refreshing. He showed her where the soil was still viable beneath the ash layer, a full foot below the surface in certain parts of the valley, where old organic matter had been compressed and preserved. He showed her how to read the ridge shadows to know where the next day's weather was coming from. He did not offer any of this as charity. He offered it the way a person shares information that seems obvious, in a tone that suggested she would have found it eventually anyway. One morning, about 2 weeks after they met, she found a small bundle of dried rosemary and sage tied with a strip of leather and left on her doorstep. There was no note. There was no explanation. She stood holding it for a long time, surprised by how much it affected her. That evening, she sat by the marsh and thought about the people who had left her, and about the strange, weathered man who had left rosemary on her step, and about the difference between people who see you only when they need something from you and people who notice you quietly when they don't. The weeks became a month, and the month became 3. Something in Mara began to shift. She had stopped measuring time by when she might be retrieved. She had stopped listening for wagon wheels on the northern path. There was a particular morning. She could not have said exactly when she woke before sunrise and lay still for a few minutes, thinking about the day ahead. The thoughts were all practical and forward-looking. Only afterward did she realize she had not thought about the settlement at all. She was angry for a while. She had not let herself feel it fully before because grief and survival had taken up all the available space. But in the quieter weeks, the anger surfaced, and she let it come. She was angry at Rowan and his hat and his uncomfortable shifting. She was angry at the people who had nodded along in that meeting she had not been invited to. She was angry at herself a little. For all the years she had accepted the smallest portion of everything without complaint, as though making herself easy to overlook would eventually make her impossible to leave. The anger clarified things. It burned away the soft, waiting feeling she had been carrying and left something harder and more useful in its place. She was not going to wait to be rescued. She was not going to be grateful when they finally remembered her. She was going to build something here, something real, something that would last beyond the current season. And she was going to build it because she had chosen to, not because she had been left with no other option. There is a difference. It matters. By the time the first frost came, the garden was small but real. She had turned the soil Dove showed her, hauled water from the marsh in a clay pot she had shaped and dried herself, and planted a late-season crop of root vegetables that would store through the winter. The building's roof no longer leaked. The cracked wall had been stabilized with a cedar post and a careful arrangement of stone. She had added a second room, low-ceilinged and narrow, using timber from a collapsed structure at the valley's southern end. Dove came down from his ridge for dinner twice a month. He ate slowly, said very little, and always brought something. Firewood. A dried fish from a stream she had not found yet. Or once, a book with a cracked spine that he placed on the table without explanation. She read it over 3 evenings and left it on the table in case he wanted it back. He never took it. She was sitting outside one afternoon, mending her coat, when Dove appeared at the tree-line and walked toward her without his usual unhurried pace. He stopped a few feet away. "People on the north path," he said. "Coming this way. Half a dozen, maybe more." Mara set down the coat slowly. "From the settlement?" "Some of them." She sat with this information for a moment. A year ago, it would have made her heart lift. The idea of being found, being reclaimed, being folded back into the warmth of a group. Now she felt something more complicated and more honest. "How far?" she asked. "An hour, maybe less." She nodded. She picked up the coat and kept mending. There were 9 of them. She recognized 5 faces. The other 4 were people she didn't know, younger, thinner, with the worn look of a journey that had not gone the way they had planned. Rowan was not among them. The woman who had been their cook was there, and the young man who fixed the wagons, and 2 others who had always been kind to Mara in small, easy ways that had never cost them anything. They came through the narrow entrance of the valley and stopped when they saw the building. The standing building. The smoke rising from the chimney. The garden. Mara saw the exact moment on each face when expectation became surprise. She stood in the doorway and waited. The cook, whose name was Petra, was the one who stepped forward. She was a broad-shouldered woman who had never been unkind to Mara, but had also never once stood up for her, which was its own kind of unkindness. "We didn't expect," Petra began, then stopped. She looked at the garden, at the second room, and at the carefully stacked wood against the south wall. "We heard the north didn't work out," Mara said. "It didn't. Bad soil. The water source was seasonal. It dried up by August. People split off in different directions." Petra paused. "We came back because we didn't know where else to go." Mara looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at the others. Their tired faces. Their thin coats. The way a few of them were trying not to look desperate and failing. She thought about turning them away. She thought about what it would feel like to be the kind of person who did that. "The ground here is viable," she said finally. "Not the surface. You have to dig down about a foot. The marsh to the east has clean water if you boil it. There's room in the valley for more structures if you know where to build." Petra waited, as though she understood there was more coming. "If you stay," Mara said, "it's not the same as before. Nobody gets to decide things for other people in closed rooms. Nobody gets left behind because it's convenient." She paused. "Those are the terms." There was a silence. One of the strangers, a young woman with a child on her hip, nodded slowly, as if the terms seemed reasonable. Which they were. Petra looked at the ground, then back up. "All right," she said. It was the same phrase Mara had used the morning she had been told to stay behind. She wondered if Petra noticed. She suspected not. It didn't matter. Mara stepped back from the doorway to let them in. Then she went to put more water on to boil because 9 tired people needed something warm, and there was work to be done. The hollow was slowly, and on her own terms, becoming home.